Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. My name is Paul Maleary, and for 30 years I served with Essex Police. During this time I interviewed suspects for murder, abduction, rape and extortion, plus a variety of other crimes. Now I interview former police and military personnel and anybody else who has an interesting story to tell. Sit back and listen to X Job Downloaded. This episode of X Job Downloaded has been brought to you today by Life Safe Technologies Stay Safe All-in-One Fire Extinguisher. Details of this product can be found in the body of the text along with your discount code for this fantastic product. Thank you and enjoy this episode. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded. And today I'm going to interview Kevin O'Leary. Now, Kevin is a former member of the Metropolitan Police. He works within media, a number of other things, but he's now a published author. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Paul.
Thanks so much for taking part in this today. Kindred spirits, both ex-job, we both like the television, and you've been very successful in that field. But where did it all begin for you, and what was your inspiration to join the Metropolitan Police?
I've been very lucky, Paul, I should say, and thanks for having me on the podcast today. Where did it all begin? I take my back. You have to have that harp thing playing now where you have a flashback, don't you? Go back to a very long time ago when I was just 14 years old. And I was out riding my bike and somebody decided they liked my bike enough to take it off me at knifepoint. And it was my pride and joy. I'd saved up for that thing with my own money. And I reported it to the police and I didn't hold that much hope. But eventually a detective took my statement and I thought, well, this feels quite serious then. And I remembered that underneath the saddle of the bike, the guy who owned it before me, because it was secondhand, I couldn't afford a new bike, he'd painted his initials and the dates underneath the saddle.
Wow.
I always remembered that. It was kind of property marking in modern terms. Anyway, so I reported that. A couple of weeks later, I was in the park and on foot, obviously, and I saw a guy. I thought, he doesn't look like the guy who robbed me. But maybe it's PTSD or something, and I'm just imagining everyone looks like the suspect. But that does look like a Carlton Continental bike, but it's a different colour, and I kind of dismissed it. And I mentioned it to the old parkie. We had parkies in those days, the park keeper. And he said, well, I'll phone the police just to be on the safe side. What do you know? But the detective who took my statement actually turned up in an unmarked car. Stopped the guy and I thought, this is going to be embarrassing. He's going to let him go now and sort of tut. He turned the bike upside down and put the bike in the back of his, I always remember it, his mid-blue Austin Allegro GP car. And he put the suspect in the back seat and he nicked him, convicted. And, so that was, I thought, well, if it's that easy, I could probably do that. So I told my parents, I think I'd like to join the police and clipped the coupon, applied to the Met, and a few months later ended up at Paddington Green, Nick, where the recruitment centre was, and went through the process and joined.
And where did you live at that time?
I was from a sleepy town at that time in Warwickshire. You may have heard of it. It's called Birmingham. So I was living there at the time. So I packed my bags and came down to the Met, and it was like, all my dreams came true. It was just a fantastic job, and I can remember being at Hendon and just loving it. I think the term is job pissed, which I probably was for most of my career. Thankfully, because I enjoyed it. I had a great time. I had no career plan. I just thought I want to be a copper. And I quite fancy the idea of being a, upstanding, respected citizen doing something that's not 9 to 5 and is, getting out and about. So I joined the job, and then one fortunate, happy accident led to another. And I ended up rising through the ranks a little bit and joining the department.
Why the Met and not West Midlands then?
Because at the time they weren't recruiting, and they said to me, look, go to the Met, do your 2 years. You can apply to transfer back and we'll take you because you're fully trained. And by that time, you would still be in the queue waiting for a position in the West Midlands. So they said, don't waste your time, go and do that. So I did the first bit, took their advice, went to the Met. I just never went back. So.
And what year was that?
Oh, 1983.
Wow.
All this was just fields.
Well, and so, what age were you when you joined then?
I was just a 20-year-old slip of a lad, 10.5 stone if I had some coins in my pocket.
There you go. And then you go around chasing robbers and telling them what to do.
Yeah, I'd chase them at a distance until some help arrived. That was, just hedge your bets a little bit.
What was it like when you turned up at Hendon, 1983? I mean, people listening to this won't understand that we had something before the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So policing was completely different. What was that like?
Rules.
Judges' rules. Last in the Act. I don't know if the last in the Act. No, the Theft Act.
No, it had gone then. We had the Theft Act 78 had come in by then. So, look, it was it kind of felt a little bit dated even back then, although modern at the same time, if you know what I mean, because you didn't know any different. You were joining a job you didn't know anything about. So it was a fantastic experience, but it was all a little bit old fashioned. Classroom teaching at Hendon with the acetate sheets on overhead projectors, just like they'd been at school. You know, you did your lessons, you worked hard, you had, a good time with your mates, in the evenings and weekends, found some activities to do if you weren't studying. And then you're spilled out onto the streets. I went to Edmonton in North London for my first posting, which I'll be honest with you, it was a bit of a disappointment because I expected to be in the West End, the bright lights and what have you. But I'm glad I wasn't, because I think I got a different policing experience being out on a sort of what was then considered an outer borough. But it had its moments. You had the quiet side of the borough and you had the busy side of the borough. And it's certainly a great place to cut my teeth. But of course, you're right. The judges' rules rather than pace. So if you nick someone, they could be, put in the cells for a while without the time clocks ticking and all the pressures to get the job done before you had to release them. I remember the CID back in those days. They just give somebody a lie down in the cells for the weekend to have a think about what they'd done. I'm not saying that's a good thing, because, it's different times now. But, it was certainly a little bit more. The police had more power and they were allowed to do their job in a way that they wouldn't be allowed to do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting because those people that then went on to enforce the rules around pace were the ones that were actually breaking the rules prior to pace coming in. The senior detectives that were saying to the young DCs, right, nick them, lock them up for the weekend and let them think about what they've done wrong. They're then the people that are saying, well, you shouldn't have done it like that, which I found there was a paradox there.
Look, poachers turn gamekeepers. They always know the rules better than anyone else, don't they?
Absolutely. How long did you serve at Edmonton?
I did 6 years there, which I'd actually tried to leave around about 5 years service, but I'd had my Panda driver and van drivers courses. So they said the only way you can do that is you find someone to swap with you on another nick. So I did want to go to the West End, but there was nobody, believe it or not, there's no one willing to swap places with somebody at Edmonton. I'm not sure why, but you'd have thought somebody, who'd probably got a bit tired of that city West End policing style might have wanted to drift outwards, where you're closer to your commutes at home and the houses are cheaper out in the sort of outer districts and in the counties, so what have you. But nobody wanted to do it. So in the end, I said, right, well, I went to see a chief inspector at Area, which is a bit of a big deal. I said, well, how far can I go in within the limits of our sort of administrative boundary, if you like, of the Met? He said, well, you can go as far as King's Cross. I said, no one goes to King's Cross voluntarily on a transfer. But I thought, well, yeah, that'll do. I quite fancy something like that. So I went into King's Cross for a few years and I had a ball. I had a great time there. There used to be a TV program, an American TV program I'll give you, but it was called Hill Street Blues. And it was on in the early 80s on Channel 4. And the police station was a bit chaotic. There's just people everywhere. And King's Cross reminded me of that. It felt a little bit chaotic. It was the first purpose-built police station in the UK. All other police stations, when that was built, had been converted from other offices and what have you, other buildings. But this was purpose built as a police station. But they actually had the charge room, as we then called it, or custody as it's called now. You'd have to walk through the parts of the building which were a corridor past this, the offices of the intelligence unit and the admin unit and what have you. So you'd have our civilian colleagues, or our police staff colleagues, as we call them now, wandering about. You came in with a lively prisoner who was having a little bit of a struggle. You'd have to bundle them down this corridor, and you see people diving back into their offices before you could get to the sergeant to report your prisoner. And then the cells were all Victorian. I remember there was my first experience of seeing one, what they called a drunk tank.
Yeah,
it was King's Cross after all, and that's an oversized cell with almost like a crucible floor. What happens is there's a drain in the middle, so you put your drunks in there, and whatever comes out of them hopefully drains away, and you put them in the recovery position so they don't choke and that sort of thing. So what an experience. It was just fantastic there. I mean, King's Cross now is beautiful, right? You'd go there socializing and you'd have a really nice time, nice restaurants and bars. Back then it was the Wild West.
Yeah, because you had all the prostitutes be walking the streets behind the railway station and what have you.
Sex workers, Paul. We call them sex workers now.
Because now I get that. We're talking about a bygone era. Now, of course, when you're in Edmonton, some really significant events took place in London. You're talking about the Harrods bombing.
Yeah.
Yvonne Fletcher was murdered, the Tottenham riots.
Yeah.
What impact did that have on you as a Bobby working those areas?
Well, I remember I was actually at Hendon as a recruit when the Harrods bomb went off.
Right.
And you could feel the shock reverberate around the campus and all the staff, especially because the staff were a bit older in service, of course, and they knew the significance of it. And we're a bit green, and we're looking around because we've got no frame of reference. You hear cops get hurt in the job and even killed, and it was like this sounds like a really bad situation. Of course, then we found out they'd actually been killed, and they had a minute's silence at Hendon. I remember that quite distinctly. I came out of Hendon. I remember Yvonne Fletcher the day she was killed. I was actually at the section house in Tottenham that day, and we were all aghast watching the telly, watching the news for updates about what had happened. And then the Broadwater Farm, I was actually at the section house. The police single quarters were known as section houses, and I lived at Tottenham section house at the time.
Oh, right.
So a lot of my mates were at Tottenham, the neighbouring division to Edmonton. A lot of my peers worked there, and some of them were actually home beat officers on the Broadwater Farm estate. And so they're telling us for weeks before there's something brewing because there's a lot of unrest. Minor incidents are escalating beyond, all the sort of reasonable sort of situations you could want to deal with. And, people get very angry and aggressive. The milkman then reported that they hadn't had any empties back for quite some time. So they were starting to write a diary about what had happened in their day book, which went missing. And that they were always suspicious that perhaps the bosses had taken that because they wanted to delete the audit trail of the warnings that were clearly coming from on the ground. I was late turn area car operator at Southgate, leafy Southgate, a lovely place at the time. And I was called over to Edmonton. Get your right kit, get in the back of this transit van. We're on our way to Tottenham. It's all kicked off. And of course, it wasn't really unexpected because I was getting that daily from my mates at the section house. And I always remember we drove there in complete silence. It's like you're on a serial.
Yeah.
Half the time there's a bit of banter going on. There's somebody playing cards in the corner. There's somebody, taking the mick out of someone else, usually me. But it was silent. And I think we all knew that this was going to be pretty horrific, and of course it was.
Yeah.
I remember getting out of the van at the other end, and I've described it as medieval. The noises of the material hitting the shields of cops who were already there on the front line, the flare of petrol bombs going up because it was dark, so it would illuminate the sort of the street and the sky. The shouting, it was like a battalion were attacking another battalion. It was just, the noise was incredible. I was 22 years old, and we were put right on the front line straight away. Now, on my website, if I can plug it, KevinO'Leary123.com, if you go on there, I've put some videos on there just to introduce different parts of the book. But one of them is about the Broadwater Farm. And I found on YouTube a video of the riot that night, and it was taken from where I was actually standing, sort of behind me. So one of those bodies in that camera wearing a sort of police riot helmet is me. And I remember, at one stage we were being shot at. Somebody got a shotgun and was on the deck opposite the junction where we were on the front line. And I could hear the crack of things hitting the shield. The riot shields are like perspex, quite thick perspex, so they can take a hit and they flex a little bit. So it actually stopped the shot coming through. But some people behind me were actually hurt. There was a couple of journalists. One lost his eye. Another was blooded by the shot that actually reached him. And he was some distance back. So I thought, blimey, if you didn't have these shields, this was going to get you.
Yeah.
A baton round firearms officer came and knelt right next to me. Of all the people, it was right next to me. And I heard him on his radio saying, I can take him, Gov. I've got him in my sights and I can take him. But it would have been the first time a baton round had been used on the UK mainland. So no one would give the order. So he withdrew, and that was the last we saw of him. So rather than, have that political step into, firing a baton round on the British mainland, because they've been used in Northern Ireland quite a lot, but rather than do that on British mainland, just let the cops get shot at instead. Hey, that's fine. So, I wasn't impressed with that.
Right, it's quite unbelievable, isn't it? That I drove through Tottenham yesterday, actually, going into North London, and it's still a melting pot. There's still tinder there, isn't there? You can see that there's still an atmosphere in that part of North London, for me, anyway. Well,
I wonder if we see the world through a copper's lens. Certainly, my kids are bored with me going through different parts of London and me telling them, oh, this happened there, and I was on duty when this happened, and I nicked someone there, and I got punched on the nose there. So we do see life through a different lens to most people, and we notice things that people don't, because our antenna starts to twitch because we've had that experience as cops. So I don't know. I think Tottenham is much improved from what it was. I think the 2011 riots, there was a lot of money ploughed into it. So, I think there's still poverty there. There's nicer areas. If you go down to Tottenham Hale now, they've massively developed the area. Lots of student accommodation. London evolves. Places that you wouldn't have, set foot in back in the day are now quite gentrified. Areas of Hackney, Stoke, King's Cross, much better than they used to be back in the 80s.
Did you work with Colin Sutton?
He used to come in and we'd consult about different jobs that he was doing when I was in SO10, as we called it then, the undercover unit. So our paths crossed, but Colin was a murder SIO, and I'm familiar with some of the cases he worked on. A lot of the cases that were, sticky, that were taking a while to investigate, they would run them past covert ops and see if there was a covert angle there. And usually there was, but it would just take some building and some developing. You'd have to get some undercover officers in there to kind of assess the situation, the area, how can they maintain cover, all that sort of thing. So, he would come in and talk to us quite often.
Yeah, I've done a bit of work with Colin, or quite a bit of work with Colin, actually. So you're at King's Cross, and it's a completely different vibe to Edmonton.
Yeah.
Where did you go to from there?
So I got an opportunity to go and work on the Northeast Area Stolen Vehicle Squad, which is actually based at the traffic garage at Chadwell Heath in the border of Essex. So I think it's your old patch, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, traffic garage is still there.
Is it?
I think, TSG are there as well, I think, at Chadwell Heath. Met TSG.
Well, we kind of got thrown out of there in the end because we were gathering so many stolen vehicles. We were taking up loads of space. So they said, look, you're going to have to move out of here because no one can get in. So we went to Barkingside, and there was a car pound there which had been decommissioned from being a car pound and had a massive car park and a little office next to the regional crime squad as it was then.
Yep.
So we went and worked from there, and it was great because we had massive parking facilities and it was fantastic. So I cut my teeth there as an investigator. I'd been doing a bit of that as a uniformed cop. I quite liked pulling bonnets up and, having a rummage around cars, because you can find it very quickly that the little bit of plastic at the front and the back of a car just tells you the registration number that they choose to put on it. And quite often, if you go beyond that, you'll find that there's a more interesting story. So I would just pull a few of them. I thought, I used to know everything, about, if you looked at the different sort of indicator lenses of a certain model of car at the time, I could tell you, well, that's not the right registration plate for that because it didn't come out that year. They changed they had a facelift on that date, not that date. So it can't possibly be that age of number plate. I was one of those, a proper anorak, right? So I went then to the car squad and just filled my boots, learnt loads about investigation, forensics, all the stuff they would do at the lab to get out ground engine numbers with acid etching and all sorts of stuff like that. And this traceability of stolen cars, you take all the numbers off it and you can still trace where that car's come from, if you're willing to put a bit of investigation into it. So I did plenty of that. Informants, working with the DVLA, working with the manufacturers as well, because they were keen that a copper was taking interest in the problems that they would see with their brand being sullied by, this is the most stolen car of the moment. They'd be very happy if we intervened and started doing some work with them. So that was a fantastic experience. Like all good things, the funding ended and it came to a stop. So I went out to the One Area North crime squad, and I worked on an intelligence unit there for a while, did my accreditation as a detective proper, and then got thrown out of there into Enfield CID, leafy Enfield.
Wow. So is One Area North, is that Enfield itself, or is it where
it covered quite a swathe actually. It was it went from Enfield. This is the old, they changed the boundaries of them, call it different things all the time. It's now, it's Central North or something, is it? No, that's Islington. I don't even know what the codes are anymore. But One Area North went from Enfield right the way down to Romford, I think it was. A big sort of section of North London. It stopped at the sort of Tottenham Hackney boundary, I think.
Yep.
It was a big swathe of London, and that was ripe car thieving territory right there. That part of London.
I mean, let's go back to the days when they were stealing the wheels off of XR3s in the garage show, from the garage forecourt. So they were literally stealing the wheels, or the radios that would come out. They had their own tools to take the radios.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think these get investigated anymore, if I'm really honest with you.
I follow, there's a team in Essex now. There's a stolen vehicle squad in Essex that are very, very effective. They're doing what we used to do. They're turning over proper car thieves who are stealing the cars to actually take them out of the country. And of course, you've got the docks there at Tilbury. Yep. You only have to open a few containers, you'll find something that shouldn't be there. You shouldn't be leaving.
Yeah.
So old BJ Harrington, the chief constable there, is supporting his car squad to do the good work that I used to do in the Met. I don't know if there's a car squad in the Met anymore. There used to be. I'm sure there is a form of a car squad there.
There must be. I mean, we've always historically had a good stolen vehicle squad, car squad in Essex, with some very, very talented people who were mechanics, because they got people that had an interest in cars to go and do these things. So they knew about the acid etching and everything else, and it was very good. But I follow them as well, and they've done some great work.
Yeah, they have.
Tracking vehicles all over the world, but it's difficult because if you look in Essex, I think the car of choice is the Range Rover, and you can hardly get an insurance on a Range Rover.
No. Well, you can't in London. So the model, the L405, see, such a petrol head still, there's sort of 2012 onwards. They're difficult to insure in London because they're so stealable. You need to get an older one, an L322, and then you'll get insured on that. So that's what Jeremy Clarkson drives. So,
brilliant. You're on the car squad. You've done that. Where do you go to from there?
So that was the One Area North crime squad. I ended up on an intelligence unit there, and it was surveillance, static, and mobile, and listening to people and their planning to get up to things. I won't go into it too much, but it was my first foray into being a secret squirrel. And it was at times, having been so active on the car squad and having a rich caseload to deal with, and everything from, identifying the vehicle through to, sometimes managing informants, managing the caseload, the investigation, the forensics, the case papers, and presenting at court. I went from that sort of varied workload to sitting still, for between 8 and 12 hours a day, and just being a receptacle for information, processing it and chucking it out. So I didn't find it as, I'm not saying intellectually, but cognitively as stimulating as the work I'd done as an investigator. But it was a really interesting thing to have done. Looked great on the CV that you'd worked in sort of organised crime intelligence. But the reality was that it wasn't as challenging as the title would suggest.
And because the whole world of informants had probably changed by the time you'd moved into that role, because in your early days, an informant was somebody who would give you information. It could be the local whoever, the local shop. Give it. But of course now with the different intelligence teams, informant handling teams, the beast changed. I mean, it changed in Essex after the Retterton murders in 90.
I saw something on, was it Amazon or Netflix? And you feature in it.
I'm in it, yeah. The Retterton murders. It's called Blood and Betrayal, the murder of the Essex boys. And we would say, and I know that there's people that would disagree, but that is the definitive of the murders. That's the definitive story around the murders and the reason why they got murdered. Of course, there's a counter argument to that, which I get. I respect that professionally. We've all got a different view. But yeah, that was interesting.
Now, I don't want to turn this into me interviewing you on the podcast, but I found that fascinating. What a case. You were quite young in service, and you were thrust into, a murder investigation, which was complex, and, it had its centre in organised crime, so.
Well, my actual role was minimal on that, because we weren't involved in the investigation, because what had happened previously, sorry about this, and we have diverted slightly, but
it'll come out in the edit.
Previously, we would get selected to go and work on murders. We didn't have a murder squad at that time.
Yeah, that's the way
when
you
murders took place in Retterton, nobody from our office got selected. And we thought, well, that's all very odd. This is a high profile, 3 people dead in a Range Rover, blah, blah, blah. Well, it transpired that the detective sergeant in my office, my detective sergeant, and one of the detective constables was running the informant, Darren Nichols, who took the 2 killers to Retterton. So that was my sole involvement. I had no involvement in the investigation at all. And yeah, that changed because, again, and I can name him because it's out in the public domain, but the officer, Wolfie Bird, was very good at cultivating informants but didn't control them. Whereas after Retterton, informants were controlled properly. So there are fewer people giving information now.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, there's fewer people giving information down from the grassroots of community policing because the neighbourhood teams have been decimated. I mean, that's coming back. It was a mistake to delete the neighbourhood policing teams, because all criminals live in a neighbourhood of some sort. And most honest members of the public recognise when something's not right. Yeah, back in the 70s, you used to see these posters and TV information adverts. If you see something suspicious, dial 999 and tell the police. We don't define what suspicious is because the public know it, right? So that community intelligence is vital for all of the work that is done by whatever department or squad it eventually ends up in. Informants are a different kettle of fish because they're, double agents, if you like, for one, of a James Bond term, but they need professional management and handling. And I think it was right to professionalize it because there was going to be a public confidence issue anyway, but it was certainly borne out by some of the corruption investigations where, who was running the informant or was the informant running the handler, so it needed proper supervision and oversight.
Absolutely. So what rank were you when you went into that role? Had you passed your exams at this point?
The intel.
Yeah.
I was what they then called a trainee investigator. So I was a scaly in one of the old terms, as they used to call it. I there was a DI there called John Shatford who became very well known. He ran Operation Bumblebee in the Met, which was an anti-burglary initiative.
Yep.
He eventually ended up as a chief superintendent of the flying squad, and he led the investigation into the Dome robbery. He did the proactive operation that caught them in the act. Really good guy, great copper, but very supportive. And I always remember him saying to me, he said, me and another guy, Mark Welton, he said, you pair, he said, you've got your sort of feet on the ground and you're quite grounded and earth, but I can see you going a bit further in the job. So in me, he said, I'm going to invest in you and I'm going to send you out for 6 months to this Hackney and City child protection team based at Stoke Newington. He said, it's all right, all this intel stuff and all this chasing around after bad guys, but we're also there to be, to protect the public, and you haven't got that on your CV. So I was doing this sitting on my backside, listening to intel and watching videos and whatever for a while. And then I went to child protection at Hackney, and it was an eye opener. And so I went there as a training investigator to get some of my accreditation evidence and what have you. Great bunch of people I worked with there. Some women who were absolutely hilarious, fun. And you needed that because that sort of gallows humor that we have in the job helps you decompress from seeing some things that are pretty unpleasant and dealing with some people who are pretty unpleasant as well. So that was great. Worked with social services. Of course, they had different resources than we did. We were there to enforce and investigate. They were there to care, support, and see if they could nurture the family. So that gave me a little bit of knocked off some of the rough edges. You can't just chase the baddies all the while. So do something to protect the public. I went back to Barkingside, worked on the burglary squad there. I found that a bit straightforward, if I'm honest. I'd already established myself as an investigator, putting stuff together. So it wasn't a major thing to deal with burglars. I didn't find it a massive learning curve there. But, great people, again, that I worked with. Went back, did some more intel work, and then popped out, finished my exams, went off as a DC to Enfield Borough. Enfield Division it was then. It was still not the whole borough. It was Enfield Division. So I worked in the CID office there, cutting my teeth on the bread and butter jobs, that every CID office has. And then they put me out to Cheshunt. Cheshunt was then in the Met. It's now a Hertfordshire station. But they said, look, the borough of Broxbourne, who pay for policing in Cheshunt, are complaining that there's no CID presence at Cheshunt. So I'd also passed my skipper's exam, the Osprey stuff. So they said, you can go there and you can run what they call the beat crimes team, the sort of the volume crimes team. So I went out there for a year. What a blast that was. Yeah. Working with a bunch of enthusiastic cops. And, I was the sheriff of Cheshunt for a little while. It was great fun.
But where you could carry out quality investigations because you were getting overloaded with the other day-to-day detritus. So Cheshunt, of course, that's the home of Tesco's.
It is.
It's the big Tesco's.
It was. I don't think it is anymore. They've gone. The head office used to be there in Delamere Road. It's not there anymore. It's a block of flats now, I think.
How long did you have in the job when you got your sergeant's ticket?
Actually, I was halfway through my service, and it was a little bit intentional actually because, like a lot of people take promotion, you do it when somebody pisses you off a little bit, right? You think, I'm going to be very polite and kind of help you to do your job, which is to supervise and lead, but you're not very good at it. So you think, it's about time really. So I did the skipper's exam and I did quite well in it actually. So I went through to in the Met you have Osprey 1, Osprey 2, then you have a selection process which you can get paper sifted from, and then you go to a central board, a central interview board. And so I got through all those steps and came quite high in it. So they gave me an option of more or less, where do you want to go? Because, I don't know, a bit of a fluke. I had some good evidence. I did quite well in the interview. So I was headed for the West End again. I tried again to get to West End Central. And I got fished out of that by somebody I'd worked with before who was then a DI and said, why don't you come to the Central Area Crime Squad and come and work on our Drugs Focus Intelligence Unit, which I didn't know what the hell that was. But I thought, do you know what? I'll always go somewhere I'm invited to. So I skipped Divisional CID as a skipper and went straight to the crime squad at Nottingdale. It was then. It was a non-public public-facing police station. Notting Hill was the local public, Nick, but this was a police building, a former police station where its desk had closed, and it was just the crime squad, really. And then
I'd never heard of Notting Dale. I didn't even know existence.
It's over towards Latimer Road, that end of things. Very nice little suburb of Notting Hill, very quiet and sleepy. But we added a bit of noise there. So a bunch of squads worked out of there. I did some drugs intel stuff. Do you know, at one stage they made me the chemist sergeant for central London. I went on a course to Yorkshire to do it in Bishopsgarth, which was a great course. It was a great week up there. Bit of a holiday, really, isn't it? And I came back as this qualified chemist sergeant, and they said, you have to go into chemists and inspect them and then destroy their drugs. I did about 3, I think, and I said, this is nonsense. It shouldn't be a police officer doing this job. So I kind of bounced it off, and then went chasing drug dealers and, around central London, which was, shooting fish in a barrel, really, for the most part, using covert ops, making a relationship with what was then called SO10, the undercover unit, doing a couple of UC jobs and test purchase jobs, as they were called then as well. And what we were doing is we were trying to get after people who were problematic criminals who also dealt in drugs. So the drugs thing was a bit of, some people called it pest control because they were just everywhere. But if you're going out robbing people, putting knives to their throats, and you're dealing drugs, we might not be able to catch you because the witnesses might not identify you. But if we've got intel that it's you, we'll do some surveillance. We'll try and catch you in the act of robbery. But if we can't, we'll catch you in the act of serving up drugs. And that's going to put you in prison, take you off the streets, which is just, the Al Capone method. We'll get you for something and put you away and protect the public the best we can. So we did quite a few of those. I ended up lecturing at the undercover courses at Hendon, just around, the role of the SIO and what you do, in order to protect the assets that you've got, run a plot. So, I made a few friends in the UC office at the Yard, which was a fearsome place to go back in the day.
Oh, yeah, I bet it was. What year was that?
99. Right. 98, 99. I got the skippers in 98, went in 99 to the crime squad. Then we did Operation Strongbox. So the crime squad kind of converted from being, through the tasking process to try and create your own jobs, go after what were the prominent criminals in the area. And then we went through a sort of a centralized tasking process where we went en masse as a whole command, visiting boroughs, and we would bolster their resources. We would look at the criminals who were, I'm not saying they were beyond the capability of the divisional officers, because they weren't. It's just that the divisional officers had that to do and everything else. Yeah. So we were a dedicated resource, and we didn't do the job for them. We went in and did the job with them because they knew the ground, they knew the people, they knew the problem, and we went in and said, well, we can help you with a bit of this. How about if we do a bit of intel work on that, or we do some UC work, or some test purchasing, or some robbery, targeting, that sort of thing. And so Operation Strongbox went from borough to borough. We started at Brixton, then we went to Hackney, and then we went to a joint one with Islington and Camden, and that's where I got stuck because I'd managed to pass the inspector's exam. John Stevens was the commissioner, and we were short of something like 100 DIs, 80 to 100 DIs. And he said, if you've got anyone out there who's qualified, you can make them a temporary detective inspector if the superintendent of the command decides that they are worthy of it. But they're going to have to apply and go through a process to get it, just in fairness to everyone, and just to make sure that they're ready. So I put in for it, and I got through. I think I was one of 40 that was successful in the process. So I was invited to stay at Islington as a DI. Now, I'd been at Islington King's Cross as a PC, so there was still some people there that remembered me as a PC, which was a bit weird because, at least a couple of them were sergeants. So I've leapfrogged them, and you have to handle that really carefully because you don't want to go in and be a complete dick, for want of a better term. And you hope they won't be to you either. But I was met with, warmth and generosity of them accepting that, things had moved and changed. And And I was trying to be as humble as possible and help them with their job to do their job better and what have you. Trying to be the leader that everyone wants, really. That was my outlook on it. Anyway, John Stevens said, look, these people have been through a process. We need them. If you decide that they are sufficient of the rank, get rid of the temporary and just promote them substantially. So I nicked one. Not for the last time in my career, I nicked one. Janet Williams was the superintendent at Islington. She went on to be a deputy assistant commissioner at the yard, and our paths crossed a couple of times again in later service. But she was very supportive and promoted me. You know, by the powers invested in me, I now anoint you Detective Inspector Substanti. Really? And I had a great time back at Islington as a DI. You know, I was fortunate in that, this is going to sound a bit cheesy, but I was honestly blessed with the team. You know, you have those things that punctuate your career where you go, do you know, that was a moment when we just had this team of people who were in total lockstep with each other in attitude, in ability to do the job, in willingness to give their discretionary effort. And that's what I got. And it was fun. It was fun. You know, it's serious work. You know, what I recall is that where I've been a PC, you go to a fight and what's going to happen? Someone's going to get a black eye and a fat lip and wounded pride. And by the time I went back, you know, 10, 12 years later, people were being stabbed, you know, and it was life ending in some cases. So you'd have these critical incidents that weren't as frequent as they were when I went back. So lots of interesting things at Islington. The missing person that turned out to be a victim of a serial killer, you know, that I picked up just because I was I had responsibility for missing persons, you know, high risk missing persons, as well as the sort of the day-to-day of running the office with another DI. And we had a significant workload between us. And I drew that straw, you know, I'm going to look after the missing persons. And one just stuck out to me one day. I thought, I don't like this. It was Paula Fields who she fell on hard times, became addicted to different substances, and to pay for it, she turned to sex work. Her children were taken into care. But, you know, she was still a human being deserving of protection. And, you know, you could have easily written it off as she's got a bit of a chaotic lifestyle and maybe she's gone off somewhere. But I didn't like it. Started digging into it a bit, got her phone records, got her financials, have frequently called numbers and all that sort of stuff. And you could actually put a line down the calendar where you say all contact with everyone stopped. Yep. She didn't have money, but there was some money in her bank account from benefits and whatever. It wasn't taken. She used to keep her doctor's appointments. She didn't show up. She used to collect her meds from the pharmacy. Didn't collect them. So I can actually tell you what date she went missing on. So we started doing that inquiry, looking for her. A couple of weeks later, I got a phone call from an SIO at Homicide, and he says, we found your missing person. A couple of lads were fishing down on the Regent's Canal in Camden. Their line got caught on a holdall beneath the water, and as they pulled it up, they found the dismembered remains of Paula, minus hands, feet, and head. And it had taken them a little while to identify her because they had to get DNA. And then she'd got a minor conviction, which meant she'd got a record. And then they matched the DNA with her criminal record. And of course, the missing person report showed up. When they started looking at it, they eventually identified there was a guy called John Sweeney had been seeing her using different names, but they identified him as John Sweeney, and he'd actually been wanted for about 6 years for trying to kill his then girlfriend Delia Balmer, and he'd gone on the run. And Delia Balmer has actually written a book called Living with a Serial Killer, and there's a TV series coming out about it, I think on ITV later this year, or maybe early next year. And I mean, it's the most horrendous domestic violence. This guy was a brutal, savage individual. They looked into his background and they found that he'd gone to Amsterdam, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, with a woman called Melissa Hungerford, who was an American model. Her visa ran out in the UK. They both went to Amsterdam. She was subjected to horrendous domestic violence, which put him in prison in Amsterdam. But he pleaded with her to withdraw her statement, which she did. She relented, and he got out. He says, right, I'll go and get my things from the apartment. You'll never see me again. Well, not only did no one ever see him again, but they never saw her again either. But there was no evidence at that time that she'd actually come to harm, but everyone kind of knew she had.
Yeah.
A few years later, her remains turned up in a canal in Rotterdam in the same way, dismembered, hands, feet and head removed to disguise her identity. But of course, DNA had moved on. So a cold case review identified her. And he was prosecuted for Paula Field's murder and Melissa Hungerford's murder at the Old Bailey. And that's unusual because although there have been joint investigations before, there'd never been a joint prosecution for murder in the UK before, when one of the victims was murdered outside the UK jurisdiction.
Wow.
But it was taken to the Old Bailey, and he was convicted and sent to prison for a whole life term. There's only about 100 prisoners in the UK that are subject to a whole life term, but he had one of them. What was interesting in Delia Balmer's book, she describes that he was popular with women, and he'd had a number of girlfriends or associates prior to her that she'd learnt of. And 3 of them had gone missing. Now, I don't know anyone in my life, my circle of friends, my extended connections, who have gone missing and never turned up.
No.
One individual has got 3, according to Delia Balmer's book, has got 3 friends, associates from the North London area that went missing, were never found again. I'm not saying he's done it, but it would be worthy of looking at, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. What other names did he operate by? Do you recall?
I don't actually off the top of my head. I think I've put it in the book, but he had a brother that lived in the same apartment block as Paula Fields. Right. Of course, his door had been knocked on, and he blanked it. And when we asked who lived there, or my detectives asked who lived there, it was just him. And some neighbours kind of referenced this other guy who was his brother. And we tried to do what we could, but of course, 2 weeks later, it's actually taken over. And instead of having me and another detective, they then threw a squad at it and quickly found out the things that were available once you start getting serious about an investigation. And you're actually then confirmed that you're dealing with a murder rather than a missing person. It kind of dials things up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I used to enjoy missing persons investigations because if it became high risk, you had everything. Because of jobs like that where it ended in murder, everything ended up in your lap. You could have pretty much what you wanted if you called it high. So, it's a fascinating world.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of X Job Downloaded. It's been brought to you today by LifeSafe Technologies' Stay Safe All-in-One Fire Extinguisher. Details of this product can be found in the body of the text, along with your discount code. Enjoy the rest of the podcast.
Where did you go to from there?
Well, then I applied for a job on invitation to go to SO10, but I was invited. Look, we've got a DI's position up here. Do you fancy it? And I thought, well, I'm really flattered. And, this is one of the elite squads at Scotland Yard. Are you sure you've got the right bloke? And I'd been doing some lectures on the courses at Hendon, and I got on with everyone quite well. And why wouldn't I? And it was interesting work, and they needed a substantive DI. So I applied expecting that I was going to make up the shortlist, and otherwise, thanks for applying. Your name is registered, and your name is now known in circles up here, but it's not you. It turned out it was kind of. I wasn't meant to get the job. I think the boss who asked me to apply was trying to see if he could get someone else. And so I turned up for what I thought was an informal chat, right? I said, come up, we'll have a chat, we'll go for a coffee, we'll have a talk through what the job's all about. I turned up, walked through the door to a full interview board.
Oh, boy.
I thought, oh, yeah, all right, I've been done here. I've been well and truly stitched up. But the superintendent that was on the board obviously wasn't party to whatever had been arranged here. And I gave the best answers I could because they were sort of natural, off-the-cuff answers to things like, how would you deal with this challenge? How do you deal with that? And, how are you going to sort of manage people who are, risk takers by nature and live on the edge and all this sort of stuff. So I gave my best answers to it and thought, I went away chuckling and thought, well, that's that. I'll never hear from them ever again. And then got a phone call to say, the superintendent really likes you. He thinks you'll, be a breath of fresh air and bring in some change. So that was it. I turned up as this naive sort of rookie DI almost in their world. And then started getting stuck into it. I never imagined for a minute that I'd stay there for 8 years, which is what I did. Because while I was there, shortly after joining, the then DCI said he was going for the superintendent's process. And he said, you can go for the DCIs. And if we both get it, I can move up one and you can move up one and stay here doing the job I now do. That's deal. So I actually got through the DCIs process. So I went from DC to DCI quite quickly. But I then got stuck as DCI for 8 years because I was in that world. And I'd had opportunities to go out as a temporary superintendent, but it was to more strategic administrative type jobs. I didn't want to do it. I was stuck on, the operational adrenaline of undercover ops. And to be honest with you, I'd rather be the DCI of Scotland Yard's undercover unit than a superintendent doing some modernisation project.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I sort of I declined other opportunities and stayed there until I'd actually passed the superintendent's process myself.
How do you feel now because there's been significant criticism around the undercover world, and there's obviously been reviews and what have you. How do you feel about the officers that have told all and let the side down from the UC perspective? I'm not telling their story, but crossing the boundaries.
Look, I always take the view that undercover work isn't secret per se. It's secret in terms of who you're doing it to and when you're doing it. And there's certain tradecraft that you need to, it might be great to sort of spill that in the moment and make yourself look good. Not many people have done that. No. I mean, most of the stuff that's out there, you could see it in a Hollywood film, to be honest with you. And people get very nervous about it. I think most of the books that I've read when I've read them don't really give away too much. They talk about the role, but they don't talk about the tradecraft. I think what happened back just as I was leaving the undercover world, I'd tried to implement a lot of change, and it's difficult to get change across the line in that world because you have to try and do it nationally. So you can bring in what you think is right for the Scotland Yard undercover unit, but there are 43 other forces there. And what was then called SOCA, the Serious Organised Crime Agency, and Customs, and PSNI, and the Scottish Drug Enforcement Agency, and all those agencies shared in the the undercover manual, if you like, and the working group. So I tried to get change, and it took a long time to do it. Recruitment was a massive problem. It probably still is again. I'm not in touch now, so I don't know. But trying to get people to do this work when they're not getting any extra pay, they just get more hassle, more friction in their lives, more danger, was a difficult sell. So I said we should try and get the test purchase officers to see it as a pathway in. So I changed that from being test purchase and undercover, because the undercovers were very keen to make the clear distance between them. But I said, we've got a natural recruiting pool there. You should try and encourage them to do it rather than keep them at arm's length and give them some guidance. So I actually got the office to create a mentoring scheme where they take people who are from the test purchase world, or even just, straight walk-in newbies. And instead of the focus of the undercover course, the national undercover course being, this is the toughest course, and there's a massive attrition rate from it. Not everyone gets through it. In fact, quite a few people don't. And so we should change the emphasis of that and say, if you're good enough and we can train you properly, we can get you ready for this role. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to go from passing the course to being, the top dog in a criminal network, but you can start doing cameo roles and work yourself into the more complex roles where you need a more sophisticated background and story. So the key to unlocking that was to get the officers who were experienced detective sergeants and trainers to take people under their wing as mentors, Now what they've got is they've got a personal and professional stake in this person succeeding. So it changed the emphasis completely from, I challenge you to get through this course, to I'm going to help you get through this course because I can see something in you. So we do all the weeding out much earlier on at the selection process in the mentoring scheme. And then when we thought this person's got some talent, we can make an undercover officer of them, the actual training sergeants owned them and took a stake in their success, and that flipped it completely. So we then called them foundation and advanced undercover officers to encourage test purchase officers as they were then to see themselves as belonging to this world. And it did help with recruitment. It's especially helped with diversity, which, isn't just a tick box. Let's be nice and, touchy feely with the communities of London. If you're going to protect the diverse communities of London, you need people who look like them, sound like them, act like them, and can get in there and protect them. So you're not going to get that with officers who are later in their service, where at a time when they were recruited, there were fewer black, minority ethnic officers in the system. So you can't wait 15 years to get undercover officers that have your experience. So this mentoring scheme and smoothing that pathway from test purchasing to undercover helped us improve diversity. I think there was some figures on it. It was like a 34% increase within 18 months, which, it did the job. And I was quite proud to have achieved that. And then there was some problems with undercover officers staying in the role too long. So the stuff that went wrong around about 2010 centered on Mark Kennedy and his role in the National Public Order Intelligence Unit. Now, that was a kind of an arm's length from the police sort of intelligence unit that was run by then what was called ACPO. So it didn't belong to a particular force. It was like a national unit, as the name suggests. And they were intelligence only. The trouble with intelligence only units is that they don't get their homework tested by the judges and by the courts to the same extent that undercover officers do when they are investigating for prosecution in the criminal justice system. So intelligence undercover deployments wouldn't have the same rigor that crime investigation UC jobs did. And my world was crime investigation, specialist crime, serious and organised crime. Public order unit was about infiltrating activist groups. Mark Kennedy was in one for 7 years. And eventually he was confronted by people who thought he was a UC. And he then went a bit Stockholm, identified with them more than he did his police role. It all came out. It all collapsed around him. Then other people came forward and said, actually, the guy I was seeing, I think he was an undercover officer as well. So the special demonstration squad was then dragged through the mill, justifiably, because there were undercover officers there that were having relationships and even children with people that they were infiltrating, so, and now the undercover policing inquiry, which is still ongoing as of this day, is examining the role of undercover and how they're supervised, managed, supported. I brought in a tenure policy, which was very, very unpopular, and I was Mr. Unpopular, because I said you shouldn't become an undercover officer with the expectation you stay there forever, because the work can become toxic. And I'm not sure, I know some of the undercover officers of long service didn't like it. I wonder if their families did. I wonder if their wives were a little bit thankful, and their husbands and their partners and boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever. I wonder, because if you pretend to be something, the longer you expose yourself to that identity, the more likely it is you start behaving in that way and you become that. The longer you pretend to be something, the more likely you are to become it. And privately, some of the undercover officers would come to me and say, boss, I'm burning out here. I've got a bit of a problem. I need a little bit of respite. Well, they wouldn't tell that to all their mates. So I'd have to be the bad guy and say, okay, I'm going to take you off this job. And you can go in and moan at them saying, that governor's taken me off the job because he thinks I need a break from it. Well, that happened a few times. And then you start looking at it, and all the psychologists who work in that field would say, there are certain signs you should look out for as a boss in this world. And I was starting to see them with some people. So I brought in a tenure policy, which was quite generous to people. But it said that after a few years doing this, you should really go back for a year and do something back in the real police. Remind yourselves of what you are as a police officer and your investigative skills, and catch up with the world again. And then you can come back. Yeah. But you need to decompress from it. Well, they didn't like it, but I bought it in the Met anyway. I tried to get it in nationally, but it was kind of resisted because undercover officers are difficult to recruit, train, and once they're experienced, they're like gold dust. You want to keep hold of them, but that's no good for the officer. That's no good for the individual. It really damages them. Anyway, Mark Kennedy thing broke. What was then called Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary came knocking, said, we want that policy, that policy, that policy. We're going to have a look at it. And of course, I'm not being smug here and feeling vindicated, but what happened was that with their weight behind it and the scandal that emerged from Mark Kennedy, it was far easier then to implement those changes without resistance nationally. And everyone thought, actually, it's not a bad idea. So that came in. So my legacy was that. I learned so much from it. It was quite a political job. There was lots of self-interest there, individual officers, different teams, different forces. You learn that to get things done, you have to have influence rather than rank, especially when the DS that you think you outrank is best mates with an assistant commissioner. And as soon as you do something he doesn't like, the assistant commissioner weighs in, Mr. O'Leary, I've heard about this change you're thinking of bringing in. Do you think that's wise? And you get that and you think, boss, who is this talking? Is it you or is it Detective Sergeant so-and-so?
Yeah.
But it was a fascinating job. I became a hostage negotiator there at the same time.
Did you get deployed much as a hostage negotiator?
Well, that was another ambush because the same superintendent who liked me and hired me for the UC world, I was walking down the corridor about a week later. He said, oh, you're on call this weekend, aren't you? I went, am I? I thought I got away from on call. Now I'm not on borough anymore. He said, no, we do kidnaps in what was then SO10 and SO11, the old C11 as it was. Yeah. So you'll be on call as the Green Commander for kidnaps. There's one running at the moment. Get yourself down to, the ops room, sit in on it and learn what the job's about. So I did, and it seemed fairly straightforward, the Green Commander role, which is just being the conduit between the ops and the negotiator cell. So I did that for a few different gigs. And then a negotiator course came up. You have to go through the selection process for it. And I became a negotiator, but I dealt mainly with kidnap cases. I did, as my wife says, go out in the middle of the night on a few occasions to bore people down from heights. But look, it's a legitimate tactic, right?
So, they know us so well, don't they?
Oh, she kept me grounded. But my main role was kidnap for ransom jobs, and I've put a couple of them in the book. I think the one that the more I think about it, and it's only sort of come to me after my service, was the 10-year-old boy that got kidnapped. And as a parent, I just think how horrific that must have been for the family. And I wonder about them sometimes. I copied the victim statement off the BBC website after trial, and that's in my book of the mum who was tied up and her 10-year-old boy was told to kiss her goodbye because he was being kidnapped, because they were looking for the older brother who wasn't there. Can you imagine that? Can you just imagine it? Anyway, so I think about them sometimes. Yeah, that young lad will be in his mid to late 20s now, and I just hope they're all doing well.
I'm sure they are. Did you work with Adrian Tudway?
Tudders.
I've interviewed him on here as well. He's an interesting chap.
He is an interesting chap.
Went to the Falklands. Yeah. He was good sport. So
I still meet up socially with.
Oh, do you?
Tudders and a few others from the old SC. I missed the recent sort of beer and curry night, but we still meet up a couple of times a year. All the sort of the seniors from that team, and and reminisce wistfully about old times.
They don't do it like that now,
Yeah.
How did you get on to being the superintendent, and where did you go then?
So I passed the superintendent's process. I got offered actually a job by Steve House when I was a DCI. He said, hang on, I'm going to rewind a bit. I went for an Olympics job at about 4 years service, but there was a reshuffle of the senior management team of SCD 11 as it was then. So my then superintendent got reshuffled to another job. I'd been selected to be the DCI for the crime portfolio for the Olympics back in about 2006, 7, something like that. So I've been in SO10 a while. And they said, you can't go because we've had a reshuffle, so we can't have two senior leaders leaving that team at the same time, so you're going to have to stay. So I thought, well, I've been selected for it. Steve House sort of wanted to keep me there. He was the Assistant Commissioner Specialist Crime back then. And so he won that battle. He saw me in the lift a few days later and he said, I'm sorry about that. Are you okay with it? I went, boss, I'm the head of Scotland Yard's undercover unit. How bad's that? So I think he quite liked me responding in that way. And a few months later, he offered me a job as a temporary superintendent. Right. And I turned it down because it was going into some projecty thing. I thought, I'd sooner be the undercover DCI than a projecty superintendent. So he phoned me and he said, you should take this job because it might lead to something else. And I said, I hear what you're saying, boss, but I don't really want to be put out to pasture just yet. So I turned it down and I stayed for another 4 years. Wow. And then I passed the superintendent substantively and I went on, I'd still got a young family. So I thought, well, what am I going to do here? Because I can just about manage the hours now and have a family life. My phone used to ring morning, noon and night in the undercover world. And you just had to accept that went with a job, whether you're on holiday, on leave, whatever, it just used to go off all the time. And then I went to the Olympic serious and organized crime portfolio and my phone stopped ringing overnight to the extent where I thought it was broken because all of a sudden I'd kind of inadvertently walked into that project world and took it over from someone. I thought, well, I've got to move and I've got to do something and all the big jobs have gone and I didn't really want another massive specialist crime job that was going to just take over my life completely again. So I went to that and it was just as boring as hell for the first 10 months. So dull. I'd go to meetings and talk about budgets and whatever. It was all very important and try to work on plans to, how we're going to actually deploy detectives and forensic people during the Olympics. And we got a plan very quickly. And we just expand the Notting Hill Carnival model of rushing people into a scene and getting them out quickly again, like the old snatch squads used to do in the 80s.
Yep.
So we put all that together. And no one would talk to me, in the specialist crime world. They're like, yeah, it's the phony war 2012. We're not interested. We've got things to do right now. And then January 2012 came around and everyone wanted a piece of me. And all of a sudden I was back in that world of doing intense long hours, phone ringing, left, right and centre. And they were waiting for a chief superintendent to come in. And there was a guy called Nick Fgrave, who is now, I think, head of the SF Serious Fraud Office. He'd just been selected as to go on the senior command course, and he got a job as an assistant chief constable of Surrey. So he was off. There were another couple of candidates who'd gone on to counter-terrorism, what have you. So the commissioner then, Bernard Hogan-Howe, said, look, we can't leave that post unfilled. So I knew my way around that portfolio by the time this sort of conversation came up. So I told my bosses then, look, I can hold it. I can manage any meetings. I'll turn up and sort of represent it. And they went, okay, we'll give you an acting then. I went, oh, that's very kind of you. I wasn't asking for that. I can do it as a superintendent. It's really easy. It's really straightforward. It's no pressure. I said, no, you'll do the job. You need a bit of rank because you're going to be dealing with people outside of the Met who are going to have that rank. So you need to be on equal terms with them. Okay. Next thing you know, the assistant commissioner, Chris Allison, my dear friend, came back and said, well, if he's good enough to do the job, let's just promote him. So by the power invested in me, IW Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin O'Leary. And I went through a process. I applied for it and got that job, which actually saw me out of my career. So I was Detective Chief Superintendent Olympics. People said that must have been a really high pressure job. And I'll be honest with you, it was, but not as much as the UC world because it wasn't as political. It was more straightforward. And actually, I had a massive team. I went to get a budget from the Home Office, and you're at this Dragon's Den type panel, and I'm justifying every penny, and I've got this big report that I've worked on and sweated over because I know they're going to rip it to pieces. And I do my bit and say what I've got to say, and they go, yeah, okay, yeah, you can have that budget. We're going to give you 10% extra on top that you don't have to apply for, and it's called an optimism bias. What the hell's that? I said, well, what often happens, especially with you coppers, you think we're going to screw you. So what you do is you try and make your budget as tight as possible. What we don't want is you to not be successful because of want of a few grand or a few tens of thousands. So we're going to add 10% on top. It's fantastic. I had all the money I'd asked for and more. And then, of course, then you're told, go and pick your team. Go and pick your team of detectives, your senior team. So I had chief inspectors and superintendents that I could pick personally and say, you, I want you to come and work with me during the games. I had a staff officer and all that. And then I realized, of course, you think this is a gift, right? You've got all the money you want and you've picked your own team. And then you realize, now if you fail, it's on you, because we've given you everything you need, everything you've asked for, and you've picked your team. So you screw it up, it's on you. Thankfully, a great bunch of people, right down to the sort of investigators on the ground, the forensic teams, the intelligence teams, they did a fantastic job. I didn't need to do a lot, really. It's like you've got an orchestra and I'm a pretend conductor at the front waving my baton around, but actually they know the sheet music off by heart, and they know all the instruments, and I just have to, that's what was going on in reality. I was a bit of a figurehead, really.
I got to meet Chris Allison a couple of times, but one of them was I got a phone call to say Sir Paul Stevenson couldn't make it to a cricket match, England versus Australia, and my lovely friend Chris Lyons was the SLO for the Australian Embassy, and I went along. I think I was a DS at the time. Chris Allison, John Yates, and a couple of others were there, plus Chris. And yeah, it was a good day. Let's put it that way.
Top man, just a great boss to work for, Chris Allison. Mick Johnson, Bob Broadhurst, all of those top bosses, they were just a delight to work for. Of course, they used to call me the token suit because they're all public order commanders, weren't they? So. Yeah, and it was just the esprit de corps that you would dream of, and it's just such a great bunch of people to work with. And again, we still meet up probably about once a year or 18 months now. We'll meet up for a lunch and again swing the lamp and talk about the good old days and what have you. So a great experience. The Olympics, actually, we over prepared for it, which is quite right.
Oh yeah.
And we had everything we needed, and a few things went awry, but for the most part, we had a great summer.
Yeah, no, it was something to remember, wasn't it? When you come to the conclusion of your service, I mean, you were involved in the nail bombing.
Well, only in a peripheral way and totally by chance. Yeah.
These are memorable things that. Yeah. That you can't, whatever the involvement is, you will always sit back and go, oh, I remember that. I was involved in.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. That's our natural position. But what was your peripheral involvement with that particular job?
It was when I was a DS on the Central London Crime Squad. We were on a surveillance job that I think it was a Friday afternoon in April, sunny day, first opportunity of a weekend really where people were in shirt sleeves, so it was quite warm. Waiting for the off board in a surveillance car around the corner. And as important as that job was, we got an urgent assistant shout because we were monitoring the local PR in case we were spotted, really, in case somebody called the police to us, because 4 blokes in a car doesn't look very good. But we were very limited in where we could sit up. So urgent assistance call, and we thought that sounds like they really need some help. So we went around the corner. We were like 3 streets away. To the Admiral Duncan pub in Old Compton Street, and it was just carnage. It was, and no matter what experience you've got, and I worked in an outer borough where road accidents, you'd see that sort of level of carnage on quite a frequent basis. But to see the aftermath just immediately after that nail bomb had gone off, and we didn't know that's what it was at the time. There was a uniform inspector and a uniform sergeant who were first on scene, and then my little team, and it was like, what the hell are we going to do? So you have to try and prioritize what to do. And of course, there's a dozen priorities that should be number one, preserve life, stop anyone else getting hurt, and try and set up an RVP so that all the emergency services don't block themselves. And all of the priorities, tend to the injured. The 3 colleagues that were with me ran to tend to the injured, ran towards the danger, and they didn't know what they were running towards. And I stood and helped the inspector and said, right, this is what we're going to do. You do this, I'll do that. You do this, I'll do that. And we kind of divvied up the role. Well, before long, the world sort of descended upon us of emergency services, and it became under control. So I then went to see my team. One of them had gone off to hospital on his own initiative, which I think was brilliant, to be the hospital liaison officer, so that he could, record the casualties who were coming in, start to make some records of who was coming in, what their injuries were, and get some names and identity documents from their possessions, that sort of thing, which was a great idea. I remember speaking to a guy who was injured and his face was singed, it was burnt, and his skin was shiny from the blast. He was the pub manager of the Admiral Duncan. His hair was singed, he had no eyebrows, no eyelashes. And there was a trickle of blood coming down his head, which was actually worse than it was because it was just a glass injury or something. I got a little bandage out of the police first aid kit and traced that back. And I was just trying to comfort him, really, because there's not a lot I can do. And, he said his name was Cinders. His nickname was Cinders. And, you do think in that moment, I've got a good sense of humour, but this isn't the time to joke about that, how ironic, because he was in cinders. Anyway, a paramedics arrived and took care of the injured, and we were kind of released from that. Helped with what we could, and then just got out of people's way because we were in plain clothes. We weren't a lot of use to anyone. They were wondering why are these idiots walking around this crime scene. So we kind of withdrew from it, went and did some notes, in my view. Well, a few years later, I picked up on a story that a guy called David Morley, also known as Cinders, had been really generous with his time after the bomb, and he'd visited the hospitals where the injured were, and there was some seriously injured. There were some murders that occurred that day, but also some very serious injuries and loss of limbs and what have you. He'd go and sit with people who were going to be in hospital for a long time and comfort them and just keep them company. Just being generous with his humour, his company, and his comfort. And, he thought, what a hero that guy was. Anyway, about 3 years later, he's on the south bank of the Thames, on the little pathway there. There's a bench. He's having a chat with a friend, and they just get carried away in conversation until, maybe about 2:00 in the morning, a bunch of teenagers walk past and start engaging them in conversation. And you can probably tell where this is going, but the conversation turns sour, and they decide that they're going to attack these two guys, and they beat them up, but quite badly. They're eventually found and taken to St Thomas's Hospital, and David Morley, aka Cinders, dies from over 40 serious injuries that he'd received from this beating. You think, what does a man have to do, to attract that level of cruelty from people? He survived the bombing of his pub, and then he's beaten to death on the streets of London. So you just. It really saddened me to hear that, because he was quite a special character and a generous human being. So some of those sort of hit you a little bit. You think about those long afterwards. Yeah.
So you finished your time in the Metropolitan Police and you decide that you're going to do something else. But what was that something else? Because You've thrown everything in since the age of 20. You've thrown everything into policing.
Yeah, it was strange. The last few months they eventually got me in a project, and it was actually straight from the Olympics, massive anticlimax of going to help take £500 million out of the organisation's budget because we're in austerity. You're a senior person on a senior pay grade, you should retire. As soon as your time is up. That was the mood music. So. I didn't enjoy that last posting because it was too administrative for me, and I'd always been operational. So what I did is I did that job and carried it alongside my role as bronze crime for Notting Hill Carnival. So I'd done that during the Olympics, and I thought, I'm going to go out with my boots on. So my last day at work was actually as the commander crime for Notting Hill Carnival. I just wanted to do my last day at work with my boots on. And I did. Then I'd set up a little business as an interest before I left, and had a little practice doing some consultancy work. I'd got a master's degree by then in risk and crisis management because I thought that would be a good thing to have. Didn't really use it in the job. And it was quite nice to have on your CV, along with your operational background. People say, well, he's worth listening to. So if he turns up and helps us run a crisis management exercise or a real crisis, he's quite a useful person to have around. So I started doing that. And then got into sort of leadership development with a friend of mine, Adam Pacifico, former cop, former barrister. And we started doing leadership stuff for business schools, London Business School, a university from America called Duke University, but they're business school based in London, Duke Corporate Education, and a few others. So I've been doing that ever since, and it's been quite successful. And it's kept my family to the lifestyle to which they're become accustomed. And I also got into television, again a little bit by accident. A friend of mine said, look, I've been contacted by a TV producer and they want to do this TV series and it sounds right up your street rather than mine. So can I give them your number? And I'd never really had any dealings with the press other than microphone shoved under your nose at a crime scene or something like that. So yeah, I'll go and speak to them because it's your intro. So I went to see these people and they're thoroughly charming and nice people. And they told me what they wanted to do. My conditions were, I don't want to make it any harder for the people who now do the job that I used to do. So I'm not giving you any secrets or any, of the secret sauce. I told them what I could do. And I said, look, all these are codes of practice, which you can find online. It's legislation and codes of practice, which are public material, open source. I can do open source stuff. Everyone knows your phone connects to a cell tower and that's how you get your bill. Everyone knows when you tap your card, it comes up on your phone to tell you that money's come out. And that's the passive data that police use in lots of investigations these days. So we could do that. I went, well, that's a TV series right there. Put a pitch together to Channel 4 and we did a pilot episode, which wasn't broadcast. It was just for Channel 4 to assess the concept. And I was the chief in the pilot, where we had a few people running around London for a few days and some ex-military and some ex-cops trying to hunt them down using modern techniques of data that was replicated. They quickly realized that whilst brilliant as I was, I definitely had the face for radio. So they needed someone else to perform the chief role, and they definitely needed somebody to actually work on the production side of it and actually make the program work. Because what was happening, I was coming off set to explain this is how things work. This is the information you need to get. And then kind of going on stage, if you like, on set and acting it out. And it didn't kind of feel right. It didn't come across right. Anyway, Channel 4 liked the pilot and they bought it. And next thing you know, we started this series. The first one was broadcast in 2015. We've been working on it for 10 years now because we started in 2014. And it's gone on from strength to strength. It's now hopefully going to be recommissioned next year. We're not sure yet, but the viewing figures this year were quite good. So it rolls on, and I work in television.
Very nice. It's an interesting world because I'm involved in commissioning and pitching and things like that, and I've learned so much. Yeah. And I'm learning every day. I've got a meeting this afternoon with a company, and it's every day's a learning curve. But I've got to thank my lovely friend Robert Rinder for getting me involved in.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But he's gone from strength to strength, isn't he? He's traveling the world, beautiful hotels. What a time he's having.
India today, but so I've been very lucky. But it has been an eye opener, I've got to say.
Don't they work hard? Don't they? Television people, we think we worked hard as cops. If you're a production runner and somebody wants a cream cheese bagel at 3:00 in the morning, you're going to go and get it. If somebody wants an SD card taking from out in the field back to the edit, it's going to happen, whatever time of day or night.
Yeah, absolutely.
They work long hours.
They do. They work bloody hard, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And as I say, I've been very lucky, and I've met some very, very interesting people and done some very interesting projects. I actually auditioned for your show for The Hunted.
Did you?
Yeah.
In what role?
When Peter left, they were auditioning for somebody to take on, and I think someone from security services got the job.
Well, Ben Owen had been doing the role as the deputy, so they promoted Ben to the chief role, and then he didn't want to do it after that. I think Peter decided that he'd had a clean sweep, had been doing it for a while, and decided that he should get out while he was on a high. Ben did it for a year afterwards, and I think he got a bit fed up of doing it because that's intense as well. The on-screen role is intense.
Yeah, it is. It's yeah. So I auditioned and failed. In fact, they contacted me.
Yeah, that's television. You know what it's like, though.
I'm not. I'm not offended by any stretch because I've just done. I'm doing a number of projects, but one I've just done around a lady called Virginia McCulloch who murdered her mother and father, and their bodies were found 4 years after their demise. And I've just filmed that, and that'll be out around Christmas time. But it is an interesting world.
Yeah, it is.
But what projects have you? You've done The Heist.
I've done The Heist. Yeah, that was another through Shine TV, which was Sky Arts got the budget for that, which is an unusual place to find the budget, but they wanted to do something in this genre. So The Heist was almost like the flip side of the Hunted coin. In Hunted, you know who you're after, but you don't know where they are. In The Heist, a crime has happened and you don't know who's responsible, but you know they're in this area. So you have to, it was a proper whodunit sort of thing. And if they could escape after committing their crime for, I think it was 14 or maybe even 28 days, I can't remember actually, then they kept what they managed to get from this division of the spoils of the robbery. I think one of them was a cash in transit van that was parked and unattended. They got a duplicate key for. That was the heist that started in the beautiful village of or town of Thirsk. Just that was the difference. We went away for that and we were put up in digs, which was just fantastic. It's like being on holiday with your mates. It was great fun. Beautiful weather and a beautiful town as well. And then we went to Alnwick in Northumberland for the second series, and there they replicated the Hatton Garden cut a hole in the wall thing. They actually built a wall out of concrete and then got one of those saws in the circular drill saws, boring machine, and cut through the wall as part of the heist at about 4:00 on Sunday morning. And then they went to a slaughter, a little disused warehouse where they divided the spoils, which is just fantastic, really good. Again, another beautiful place, Alnwick, in Northumberland, and they made us feel very welcome, the locals there. Looked after us a treat.
Lovely. And now, of course, you're an author, Where the Evidence Takes Us.
That's it.
How did you feel about writing that?
Well, I decided to do it because it's 10 years since I've left the job, and I thought it's a now or never. And I wanted to have a little legacy thing for my family, really, because they know Dad at home, but they don't know Dad in the context of what he did for most of his adult life. So I wanted them to have that. My dad died a long time ago. I always remember people coming up to me telling me little stories about him, and I thought, I didn't know that about him. I knew him as Dad. I didn't know him as Jim, the bloke that he was, and the young lad that he was. And so all of those things I found quite interesting. I always thought I must do that for my children. So I thought, well, I can kill two birds with one stone here. This is kind of what I'm about. This is what I've done. So I started putting it together. There's a couple of books that inspired me. John Sutherland's book, Blue. Yeah. And John's written a blurb for my book, a recommendation, which I'm very grateful for. And his books are fantastic. I thought, well, I can't write as well as John, but I've got a few stories that I can put together in the same way that he did. So I started scratching them out. And then someone I work with, Tremaine, my partner in crime, said, you'll get those published, And I've got she's published 6 or 7 times, I think, as an author. And she introduced me to her agent, who hawked it around and found a publisher for it. So I also read Adam Kay's books, which I thought were very funny. I thought, I can't write as well as him, but I've got a few anecdotes again. And then a few people have said, you should write a book. So I thought, well, I'm going to do it then. And of course, what you do is you write out a load of stories. And what you actually get to publish at the end is probably about 50% of what you've written. Because a lot of the things I looked at and thought, I can't write that. I can't publish that because it's a bit too close to the mark. Yeah. So I've told about the character of some of my experience rather than the deep detail of what happened. And, I've tried to protect the innocent or people who I worked with, names have been changed to protect their interests and what have you. So I was very careful around it. I was kind of writing it with two lenses, if you like. First of all, let's tell a story, and secondly, let's make sure I don't get nicked under the Official Secrets Act, and let's not cause anyone to be anxious about anything I've written. So let's disguise it enough that no one will be able to identify anyone. That's my hope, anyway.
And when is it released?
It's gone now. It's gone out. It went out a couple of weeks ago. So it is out there. It's available at all good online bookstores. So these they call it print on demand now. They used to print loads of books, and you'd find your book 6 months later in the remainders bin at your favorite bookstore. Publishing is expensive, and to manage the risk of a new author, they do print on demand. They do it with lots of authors, but especially a new author. So you go and order the book, and it's printed that day by a big machine somewhere, and then sent out, and It'll get to you the next day. So if you go on my website, kevinoleary123.com, I've put on there links to Amazon, Waterstones, couple of others, Foils, I think, but also there's one in there for Roman and Littlefield, which is my publisher, and use the code and they'll give you 30% off. So that's a bargain. And what actually happens, it almost doesn't matter which channel you go through, it goes to the same printer and they print it and send it out to you.
Of course.
So
well, I'll put all of the I'll say that again. I'll put all of the links into the body of the text on the podcast, so that, and I'll circulate it through my different social media strands, X-Job Services, X-Job Connections, and what have you. And if I can help in any way, I'm more than happy to to assist. But before we conclude this interview, is there anything you'd like to add, alter, or correct in relation to the statement that you've made today?
I want a lawyer.
All the cops laugh. Anybody else I interview, they're like, I haven't got a clue what you mean, mate. But
no, I think the only thing I would say is that I think the people who do the job today have it harder than we had it. I didn't go to things as a uniformed cop and be surrounded by people with mobile phones filming and criticizing what I did, and then editing it in a way that showed a particular point of view with a narrative of the editor's choosing, and then put on social media. That's what they're facing now. I think it's a really challenging job. I think it's much more political than it's ever been. So, they have my admiration and support.
I'm absolutely.
And I hope they stick at it. Those who are wavering, I know people don't all stay as lifers as we did and do their full 30. That's across all sectors that, not everyone stays in one job for life, and we didn't in the job. We did lots of different jobs in the job, but I hope people stay. I hope people make it. I hope people don't get too disappointed or frustrated with it, though I understand if they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tough job.
Yeah, and you just hope they all keep safe as well. But I'd like to thank you for your time today. I've really enjoyed our chat. I hope you've enjoyed the experience.
I have immensely.
Hasn't been too tiresome for you. So thank you so much, and I will speak to you very soon. God bless you.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of X-Job Downloaded, which was brought to you today by LifeSafe Technologies Stay Safe All-in-One Fire Extinguisher. The link to the product can be found in the body of the text, along with your discount code. Many thanks, and have a great week. Thank you for listening to this episode of X-Job Downloaded. Please like, follow and share. Your support is invaluable. Thank you.